Hey guys, this is Chad Jadis, and you're listening to The Art of Suffering. Our mess becomes God's message. In St. Matthew's Gospel, Jesus Christ gives his followers an open and inclusive invitation to follow him, but also makes it clear, when one decides to do so, there will be a price not all are willing to pay. Those on the narrow path become the exclusive few among his exclusive invitation that's extended to all. Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. As Christian men and fathers, we are often told throughout years of formation that one day we will be asked to lay down our life for those we love, especially our bride, and the children that are entrusted to our care. That is true for any man who makes the conscious decision to become a father rather than remaining a biological factor cooperating with God to bring about a new life into the world. Being a parent of any child is a challenge and will ultimately bring about spiritual maturity, as the world becomes less about you and more about pursuing the good for those who are around you. However, there are some men, specifically fathers, that are called to go above and beyond that when they are entrusted with a special kind of child. As a parent of a special needs child myself, I came across this poem one time, and as I read it, it really spoke to the depths of my soul. It's called Welcome to Holland, and it's written by a woman named Emily Pearl Kingsley. I am often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability. Try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. Well, it's kind of like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation or a trip, specifically to some specific destination, let's say Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and you make all your wonderful plans for how the trip's going to be. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, when the plane lands, the stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's a change in the flight plan, and they've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible or incomprehensible place, just one you never expected. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would have never met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy. It's less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills. In Holland, it has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy. And they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they've had while they were there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never ever go away. Because the loss of that dream is a daily loss. And that loss is significant. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to go to Italy, you may never be free to discover the ultimate gift you received when you landed in Holland. Today I'm going to have a friend of mine, a brother in arms. One of the few men that I can say when I carry a conversation with him that he knows exactly where I'm coming from because he's walked a mile in the shoes I've also been asked to wear by God. Brian Watkins is a convert to the Catholic faith. He's a father of 3 children. His oldest is actually his sister-in-law that he adopted and raised after the loss of her mom and dad at the age of 5. His son Logan was born with Spina Bifida, and his youngest son is Lucas. He has taught special education in middle school and high school for close to 10 years, and he holds an MA in special education. The Watkins family received the Governor's Gold Award in 2009 from the Office of Disabilities for Families. He was named the Educator of the Year in 2014 and received the Governor's Gold Award in 2014 from that same office. Most recently, he was named the Lafayette Educational Foundation's Inspirational Teacher of the Year for 2020. He and his wife are co-founders and directors of the D.R.E.A.M.S Foundation of Acadiana. This is a nonprofit dedicated to providing sports and activities to individuals with disabilities. D.R.E.A.M.S of Acadiana also opened a manufacturing company which employs 21 individuals with special needs that produce meat pies to distribute to local jails, nursing homes, and stores. Brian, welcome to the program, and thanks for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you, man. As I'm thinking about, all the conversations we've had in the past, I'm thinking about back to when I met you for the first time. It was a crucial time in my life. I remember we got the diagnosis for Eli in the middle of the pregnancy, and I was teaching at St. Thomas More, and Monique, who is your sister-in-law, who you adopted, was in the classroom. And as I was journeying through this turn of events of my wife and the pregnancy, and the kids there were praying with me and watching this unfold day by day, I had no idea the entire time that Ashley was pregnant with Eli that there was a young lady sitting in my class whose nephew, who she happened to live with, had spina bifida, and she was very familiar with it. And I remember after I wrote the manuscript that eventually became my first book, Waiting for Eli, A Father's Journey from Fear to Faith, she made me aware of the fact that you guys did have Logan, and that she brought you the manuscript. And I remember that you read it and you reached out to me, and our relationship began. And I know at that time I was just so thankful to have another man I could talk to who had walked down a mile that I was about to walk, and had some insight, some understanding, and it could understand as a man where some of the emotions and some of the feelings I was having were coming from. So it's been blessed. It's been a blessing in my life to have you as a friend. And I would just ask right now, if you don't mind, can you kind of share a little bit of your journey? Because you are a parent of a child with special needs, but your road to difficulty and to change and to embracing suffering came way before Logan came into your life, right?
Yeah. Sure. And before I jump in, I did want to say a little aside about that poem. I read that poem you sent to me the other day, and I read that poem to my wife the other night. And to be honest with you, we were both in tears. It completely sums up exactly what you go through as a special needs parent, no matter what the special need is. And after doing this for 22 years, I can attest Holland's a great place. I enjoy it well. But back to what you had asked, my wife and I, we started dating in college. It was a kind of strange for me because I'm an only child, so I never really had a lot of family around. My wife is the oldest of five, and it may have been a week after we were dating when she was throwing me into the mix of her crazy family life with all their brothers and sisters around. In fact, the day that I met Monique, she was a little baby, maybe 5 or 6 months old. I had no idea we were even going by mom and dad's house. But when mom answered the door with a vacuum cleaner in one hand and Monique in the other, she quickly shoved Monique into my arms, and her and my wife took off to the back of the house. The crazy thing about it is that was the very first time I'd ever really held a baby. So it's always one of those that sticks in my mind because I know even as awkward as that moment was and scary for me, that was the day that I really felt like I became a dad. I know that was the day I fell in love with that little girl. Unfortunately, things happen in our lives that, sometimes we don't understand. And very soon after my wife and I started dating, just a few years into it, her dad was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. It's one of those things where when it happens, your family and friends, we all gather around. He's going to beat this. Everything's going to be fine. He's a young man. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And Don made it about a year after his diagnosis and wound up passing away at the age of 46. So instantly, my wife and I were still in school, but we pretty much started helping to take care of the rest of the kids, including Monique, because you've got to imagine losing your spouse after 25 plus years, how difficult it was on her mom. Unfortunately, just a couple of years later, her mother's diagnosed with colon cancer. And we go right down that same road again. This time, right after we had gotten married, the cancer just got worse. My wife's mother wound up passing away a little later that year at the age of 49. Instantaneously, my wife and I really became kind of the head of the household, if you will, the ones that her brothers and sisters were going to look up to and needed that guidance. Monique at the time was 5. We had her, we'd been helping to take care of her for, years, but now is a situation that this was a permanent job. she was going to live with us. So that's where kind of our start, my story starts. Taking the little one into, our household, which at the time was a 1-bedroom apartment. Tried to make the living room into kind of a makeshift bedroom for her and make the best of it. Then not just instantly becoming a parent of a 5-year-old. Most couples out there get a chance at least for 9 months to get ready and get braced for that baby. This was overnight. And all of a sudden there's a little 5-year-old running around in our house, and I'm stepping on toys left and right. And you're getting used to that life, that lifestyle. And then going through the growing pains with Monique, there at the beginning. You can imagine, what losing your parents would do to you as a young child. As a 5-year-old, in certain ways, I think it was a blessing that she lost them as young as she did. But there again, it's give and take on both. And the reason I say blessings is because there wasn't as many memories at that time for her to dwell on, to really get down upon. I think the toughest part was the 3 of us trying to figure out how she fits in our picture. Donielle and I, my wife and I, had figured it out, but there were moments where she'd run up to me and call me daddy and call Donielle mom, which I think it was a little harder on my wife because, that's her sister. And we just decided to kind of let that roll as it may, and let her figure it out. And she did. She eventually just started calling us Brian and Donielle. And that was our life. But it wasn't where it stopped. The story from there. A few years later, we'd kind of gotten used to our life, settled down into raising a child that, physically wasn't biologically ours. And that's when my wife became pregnant with my first son. And we were all excited. Monique was going to get to be a big sister. She was elated because there's such an age gap between her and her other siblings. And we got through the 9 months of the pregnancy and got to the day of the birth. That's when my son Logan came into the picture and came in style. When he was born, he wasn't breathing right off the bat. They had to resuscitate him and immediately took him to the neonatal intensive care unit. We had no idea what was happening for what seemed, forever, but it was just a span of minutes. But that's when we were given the news that he had been born with Spina Bifida, and he would require immediate surgery and, an entire list of things that we could start preparing for. Of course, at that moment, all I heard was death, paralysis, and surgery. So it was a shocking awakening into the world of parenthood, if you will. So, yeah.
No, I was thinking here, we did a little questionnaire before the show, started, and we've talked several times because we're really good friends. But I asked one of the questions was, what was your spiritual benefit from the suffering, especially with discovering Logan after the pregnancy? Our story is a little different. I mean, I discovered the birth defect before my son was born. You were anticipating being a dad. And, this past couple of weeks, I was flipping through a news feed on Facebook, and there's another young man that I'm friends with that grew up in my neighborhood. He's a little younger than me, got married. There was a picture of him, and he was holding his son. And I remember having a conversation with you, and in the post he had on Facebook, he said, "This is going to be my quarterback." And I know we've had this conversation before where you talked about when Logan came out, you expect him to be your baseball player, your quarterback. Like any dad who's had a past of being involved in sports and teams has this vision in their mind when they're going to have a son. This is the life you're going to have. And then all of a sudden you get dealt this other life instead. And you wrote in your answer, "I feel that my personal suffering aided my spirituality by facing my grief and denial. And through my grief and denial, I eventually began to reach out for God. And the more I embraced his path for us, the more my love of God increased. I realized he had chosen us to become something more than we could have ever imagined. And I realized how much he loved me." I'm pretty sure that journey started from that moment when you were conflicted about the reason you had a kid that was never going to be a football player and has brought you to the point you're at right now. Can you kind of walk us through some of those thoughts?
Sure. I'll be very blunt. The first couple of years after Logan was born, was probably the most difficult time of my life. As you mentioned, coming into this, I had recently converted to Catholicism and had begun building my relationship with God over the course of time with taking Monique in and then preparing for the birth of my child. But this was something that really threw me over the edge, and I physically turned my back on God. I turned away. I wanted nothing to do with God. I couldn't understand why he would allow something like this to happen to my son, to me, to my wife, and not just the birth, but what had just happened to Monique and her parents, my wife's parents, in passing so early. I was very angry at everything and everyone. And this went on for at least 2 years, but slowly, I can't tell you that it was a magical voice. I can't tell you it was any one particular time, but slowly I started thinking in a different light. And I guess the question that kept kind of popping into my head was not so much, why does God allow this to happen, but why do I view it as bad? And I know that sounds kind of crazy because nobody wants to lose a loved one. But when I really started thinking about my wife and her parents passing away so young, yes, for us selfishly and for our sorrow and our grief, it was a bad thing. But was it so bad that they're now living in paradise with God? So when I started to kind of turn and really re-question what was going on and really examine what was going on, yes, Logan was born with some difficulties. Yes, he was going to have hurdles in his life. Yes, as a typical parent, it was horrible. But at least I had a child. There's so many parents out there that are never able to have children. The blessing that I had received, not only by being asked to raise Monique, but now having a child of my own. Yeah, they're a little different, but there's so many blessings that are now going to come from that. And it really started to turn my focus at that point to where I started asking and talking to God more. It really started to turn my journey with my faith and with God completely a 180 at that point, to where I know at this point, 22 years later, I've developed a very strong relationship with God over it. And it all came through just acceptance of what God had chosen for me.
Well, what's beautiful about your answer is that you hit on 2 of the 5 stages of grief. You talked about anger, and anger is one of those 5 stages of grief. And obviously everybody goes through that in a different way, and there's no right or wrong way to do that. And then the other one is acceptance. And then for me, I'm about halfway through your journey. I think Eli's going to be 12. So it's been a little over a decade for me. And maybe this will resonate with you. But, I figured out not that long ago that I'd been praying for so long, in some of my anger came a little later than yours. You said yours came immediately. Mine came kind of after, when I had time to slow down and take it all in. But for me, I realized that for the longest time, I've been praying for the wrong thing. I had prayed for God to change my situation. And the reality was God had put me in that situation so he could change me. And once I realized that, I left the stage of anger and entered into the moment of acceptance and understanding exactly what it was God wanted me to do with this, and how this was part of his plan for my life and part of his plan for Eli's life, just like part of his plan for Logan's life was for you to be his dad, and part of his plan for Eli's life was for me to be his dad. And, I remember when I first met you, one of the things that fascinates me about your story is you were selling insurance for the Knights of Columbus, and you were making a really good living doing that. But after all this stuff you experienced with Logan, something changed in your heart, and you decided one day that you felt called to leave that and to go back to school to get a master's in special education so you could become a special ed teacher. I'm assuming that began to happen once the acceptance of your situation had already fallen into place. Can you tell us about your journey from that?
Yeah. That happened a little later on. Logan, of course, relies on a wheelchair for mobility. He has a limited feeling below his waist. So he's limited in what he can do, or let me rephrase that, what we think he can do. So as he was growing up, Monique was heavily involved in sports, softball, soccer, basketball. Now, Logan is, he's Mr. Personality. I don't think he's ever met a stranger in his life. So he would go to every game for his sister. We'd make Monique believe that he was going just for her, but we knew exactly what he was going for. He was going out there to visit with his homies out at the softball field. I guess he was about 6 or 7, and he'd been visiting all day. We were in a softball game, and it was tight, and it was kind of our time where we could enjoy Monique when we knew he was taken care of by the people that were around. All of a sudden, he wheeled up to the side of me and was just kind of sitting there watching the game, which I thought was odd. And just out of the blue, it seemed like everything went silent. And he looked up at me and he said, Dad, when do I get to play? And that had to be the hardest question that I've ever been posed in my entire life. I had absolutely no idea how I was going to answer him. Thank God at that point, somebody had made a hit and the crowd went wild. So I had a few seconds to collect myself. But long story short, I said, I don't know right now. I'll check into it and get back with you, which checking in and getting back with him was the next 15 years of us diving in, finding different types of sports and activity programs here in the Lafayette area, of which he could be a part of. He wanted to be a member of a team, so we started finding things like the top soccer program, or we actually I went with a number of other dads in kind of the same situation we are, and we petitioned the Boy Scouts of America to allow us to have a Cub Scout pack that was dedicated just to kids with special needs, because we had to tailor the activities around their needs and their limitations so that they could succeed. Started working very hard with that. We found a program through Little League of America called Challenger Baseball, and immediately went to Lafayette Little League here and asked if we could get something like that started here. And their only question for us was, we'll be happy to start it, but can you find the kids? Well, most definitely we'll find the kids. So we started that, helped start that with them, which led actually to a journey a few years later to the Little League World Series for our little team. So basically, we started putting together different programs and different activities left and right to where my son and other children like him would have choices, year-round things to do, where they had something just like everybody else does. And the more that I continued to work with the kids in these programs, the more I fell in love with them. I was miserable when I was on the road. I was miserable away from my family. And all I could think about was spending time with my family, spending time with the kids through our foundation. And oddly enough, I don't know, I cannot remember the lady's name, but oddly enough, there was one of the games that we were at. Right after the game was over, a lady came up to me and asked me where I taught at. And I always thought it was kind of an odd question. And I remember looking at her saying, I don't teach, I make money. I'm in sales. I can't afford to teach. But she made a comment to me then. She is, I've watched how you work with the kids at every game. And I just assumed. And that part of it right there started gnawing at me. And I really think that was God's little voice in the back of my head saying, I've been telling you, and you're just not listening. And it took me a while. Another little struggle with God, saying, this is crazy. I'm not giving up an income of 6 figures or more to go teach. I mean, why would you send me that direction? But finally, I don't know why we fight with God. We're not going to win. So I finally realized, you know what, this is what I'm meant to do. And after building up the courage and sitting down with my wife and explaining to her that we were going to switch incomes real quick, she was more than accepting, which surprised me. I went back to school, became a special needs teacher, and have thrown myself into what I call the best job on the planet. Because there's not another job out there that you can go to every day where you're told by your kids that they love you at least 100 times and you receive at least 50 hugs. that means more to me than any amount of money out there.
I would say that's a dream come true. I'm going to kind of tailor that into your organization, which is the Dreams of Acadiana Foundation. And I know you well, and I know your journey very well. And I know that when you were making that transition, you and Donielle had already established Dreams of Acadiana. And I read one of the questions I gave you beforehand. I read some of your words, and man, they just hit me in my heart. So I'm going to share them now. And it kind of sums up what you just said. But it said, when I began to look at the world through Logan's eyes, that's your son, and other children with limitations like the ones you work with every day, I saw how pure they saw the world, their happiness despite the extreme obstacles that had been put in front of them. And that's when I began looking at how I viewed the world. And I began to imitate what had been put in front of me, trying to look at life as pure, trying to look at life with happiness. I think that's when I began to transform myself in love in a completely different way. And in order for you to leave that six-figure salary, you have to see a deeper, a supernatural form of love, not just a natural form of love, to be able to share that with kids. And I've seen you, my son's participated in some of the things that you guys helped organize and establish in this area after Logan was born, so they could have those kind of opportunities. I've been at some of the Dreams activities. I know when Eli goes play basketball, you guys are out on the court. And, we also share another unique thing in that we're both, well, you're a current faculty member. I'm a former faculty member of St. Thomas More Catholic High School. And that's where my journey happened with Eli. And I kind of feel like it's a culmination now having you there working in the options program, where you do have those kids that walk up to you every day and tell you they love you and they hug you and they really appreciate what you do. And another unique thing that we share is that in 2010, after Eli was born, and I wrote my first book and began sharing the journey, much with your help and aid, because one of the first places I shared that story was in the parish that you were working in at the time with the Knights of Columbus. I think it was St. Joseph's in Milton. And I won the LEF Inspirational Teacher Year Award from the foundation for Eli's story. And now 10 years later, you're running the options program at St. Thomas More, and you won that award. And it's the most prestigious thing that can be won in the LEF categories. They offer, I know, a middle school, a high school, elementary school, and then an inspirational category. And my heart was beaming with pride when I heard that you won that, because I think every teacher should experience that, but especially teachers that are giving their time, their energy, their love, and their effort to kids like that every day. And then I have up here that quote you mentioned earlier when Logan asked you, when do I get to play? And you talked about how difficult that was. I think part of being inspirational is being able to take on things like that are probably the most awkward situations for a parent to be in, and allowing God to work in that and make it something beautiful. And you and Donielle have definitely done that with Dreams, and you've done it with what you do at St. Thomas More. So talk to us a little bit about what it meant to win that award and how that's kind of like played into, I'm going to kind of spill the beans for our audience. We were talking before the show, and you're working on a memoir about your life. And I think it needs to be shared. And I think that people like us, they need an outlet. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know that, especially men, there are other men out there that are dealing with these things every day, and that you're not alone, and that there's a support group out there for you, and then there's a support group out there for your kids. Kind of tell me a little bit about what winning that award meant to you, especially what you do now at STM, and how you hope that with what you're doing with this writing will kind of make Dreams its foundation, not just known here, but maybe known in other parts of the United States.
To be perfectly honest with you, when I had been nominated for the Elliot Award before, which is always a huge deal for any teacher out there. It's a time when you know that you've made an impact, if nothing else, on one child, one parent, one colleague. And I think it was Mother Teresa who said something to the effect, if you can't feed them all, then feed at least one. So when you can make an impact on one person, it's a very humbling feeling. It's a very good feeling. So I had been nominated before, and when it came up this year, and they surprised us right after Mass there at St. Thomas More and called all the teachers up on stage, you're overwhelmed to begin with when you're nominated, especially when you're standing up there and you're looking at other teachers who you know and admire and respect immensely. It's very overwhelming. And then when it finally starts to sink in, it's this constant, well, who nominated me? Who thought enough of me to give me that nomination? And so there's a long period of time where you don't find anything out. You have to wait a few months to know that nomination. And in the past, as I had always looked, I really felt that I felt like the LEF awards were kind of stacked against teachers in my field because I really felt like it was based upon the numbers of nominations that you receive. And so when you're competing against other teachers that may be in front of 300 or 400 students per year, makes it a little bit more difficult when I'm working with 20, and out of the 20, I've got 4 or 5 that could possibly write a full sentence on their own. So they're going to require help. So, I at that point I felt great. It was overwhelming just to be nominated. And then when it came down a few months later, was completely caught by surprise. We were in the middle of a classroom project trying to, I think, create some Christmas gifts for parents or whatnot. I had my hands in all kinds of goo and sleeves rolled up, and just horrible point to come in. And the next thing I know, I've got air horns going off and this parade of people coming in with confetti and a big sign saying that I've become a finalist. It was about all I could do just to remain standing. I mean, it was very overwhelming. I shocked just at all that number one, I was nominated. Number two, that I was picked as a finalist. And to kind of bring that magnitude there, I believe this year there were a little over 1,800 teachers that were nominated in our area. So to be a finalist, you're one of the top 16 out of that 1,800. So the percentage chances of you actually being selected are very slim. Anyway, got through that point, dealt with a lot of anxiety over the Christmas break, wondering, again, who could have possibly nominated me, why they would nominate me. I've never done anything that with our foundation or become a special education teacher for pats on the back or for my glory. To me, it's about seeing their smiles and about seeing their joy, and that's all I've ever needed. So it was kind of an anxious couple of months, and then when the night came, they have you put on a tux and take you up there in a limo, and it's to the nines when they bring you in. And seeing yourself up on the big screen in front of thousands of people in attendance, being up there with 3 other completely just phenomenal teachers in your category, and then having your name called, it's probably the most overwhelming experience of my life. I think the only thing that really saved me is because of the lights on the stage. I couldn't see the faces out in the crowd. And I thank God every day that happened, because I know I'd have probably fainted at that point. But again, a wonderful recognition. It wound up, the recognition came, it was a strange way that this came about, but our head librarian, Cindy Sulik, kind of led the charge with all my kids and took them to the side and helped compose a letter on my behalf, which had just meant the world to me. Not only did this come from my kids, but it also came from someone that I made an impact on, and I didn't realize I'd made an impact. So, just totally wonderful experience. Again, I still to this day, I don't consider myself an inspiration in any means, my wife or myself. We know we were chosen. We know that this is the path that God wanted us to move upon. He created me to change some lives and change a part of the community that need changing. So since that, you had made a little allusion to my current project. Since we have been quarantined now for 3 months, I've had a lot of little voices going on in my head for quite some time, but they got louder and louder and louder. And I know it's God in his kind of practical, joking ways, saying, okay, here's what's next. So it got to a point where it was over. I couldn't take it anymore. I just got to start writing our story. So I've begun to do that. I'm a few chapters away from finishing this book, and my main my main hope is that the story that we have to tell that has happened in our lives, if it can, I'll use the word, inspire one other person, help one other family, open anyone's eyes in the world to the joy and the love that's around us through our population of individuals with special needs, then it's all worth it.
That's a beautiful answer, Brian. And I just want to I want to finish up by thanking you for our friendship. Thank you for your humility, and it's been really great having you on the show today. And your vulnerability, man, and sharing this personal struggle and how you've allowed Christ to work in it, not only for your own benefit, but more importantly, for the benefit of so many other people, is a real blessing. It's a blessing to me to have you in my life as a friend in this walk. It's a blessing to the community that, I guess, bases people's identity on what they can do instead of who they are. And that's backwards. What we do doesn't define who we are. And our kids, I think, are the best explanation of that for anybody. If you're in direct need of this kind of ministry, you have a special needs child, or you know somebody and a family friend or a family member who does, I want to encourage you to reach out to the D.R.E.A.M.S Foundation of Acadiana and to Brian and Donielle Watkins. They're going to be there and have some opportunities for you and your kid and for a chance to build community. And if you enjoyed this program and you want to share this incredible journey with other people, I ask you to share the podcast, give it a rating, leave a comment. And if you would like to invite me to speak at an event, you can make that request on one of my social media outlets that's listed on my website, or pick up a copy of my books at chadjadis.com. Remember, all proceeds from my writing and speaking go to fund Eli's lifelong medical expenses. Remember, we got to boast most gladly in our weaknesses, right? So that the strength of Christ might be with us. For when we're weak, as Brian has shared today, that's when we're strong. And it always takes a Good Friday in our life in order to leave behind who the world says we should be, so we can rise with Christ on Easter Sunday and become the person God created us to be, a saint. So until next time, God love you.
In a world that says give up, I did not yield. I gave my all for your battlefield.